It's just so simple. It's just a really simple setup. This would be a great thing to do for your very first garden. I wish I had done this when I first started gardening. If I was starting a garden from scratch this year, I'm going to tell you exactly what I wish I would have done when I started my first garden almost 10 years ago. I'm going to give you a simple layout and design that'll be perfect for a beginner gardener and will be easy to expand upon in the future when you inevitably decide that you want to expand your garden, when you realize how awesome it is to harvest food right from your backyard. Now, if I could go back in time, the very first thing that I would do is plant more perennials in my garden. And I'll show you exactly how I've gone about putting more perennials in my 400 square foot garden right here. So right here, beside the bolted bed of spinach, I have a row of blueberries here. I planted these last year. They're very slow growing, but they are growing. And once these get more established, these are going to feed us every year from here on out. I wish I would have planted these about 10 years ago, but of course, I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. If I could go back in time, I would plant way more blueberries. They're very expensive at the store, and they're on the Dirty Dozen list. They're very hard to find blueberries that haven't been sprayed with pesticides, so another good reason to grow these yourself. On the other side of the garden here, we have a hedgerow here of raspberries. I have a couple different kinds of raspberries. You see, these are getting ready to flower and start to fruit soon. But let me teach you something that I wish I wouldn't have done with the raspberries, because what I'm finding is that these spread really bad. So you don't want to plant these raspberries too close to your raised beds because the root systems are so massive under the ground. I'm starting to have some raspberries canes start to come up in this raised bed, and that has been a really big problem, and I'm worried that, see, like right down here, and I don't want raspberries taking over this bed, but I'm not sure what I can do about that now. But if I could go back and do it again, I would still plant the raspberries, but I would do them in pots. And I have a couple grow bags that I have them, so you can control the roots a lot better in a container like that. Now, the first perennials we ever planted was strawberries. We have a bed of strawberries here. This wasn't the bed of strawberries, but these were the first perennial that we ever got, and strawberries are an amazing thing to grow because they're just delicious, and they're the first thing usually. If you have a June-bearing variety of strawberries, they're gonna be the first kind of fruits you're gonna harvest in the month of June. So definitely recommend growing at least a few strawberries in your first garden bed. Fruit trees are another really good option for a perennial to add to your garden. We do have a row of fruit trees now, but I only have planted them in the last 2 or 3 years, and we're just starting to get some apples from some of them, and I planted some peach trees last year. It's going to be quite a while until we start getting fruit from those. So they say the best time to plant a fruit tree was 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. Another bed of perennials I have back here is, this is asparagus. I'm letting this go to seed. I'm going to save some of these seeds. They form these kind of berries on here. They're supposed to turn red. When they turn red, that's when you could save the seed. But I have asparagus in here that I started the asparagus from seed. That is not asparagus, that's a weed. But yeah, some of this young asparagus I'm just letting grow. I didn't harvest any of these yet, but next year I'm going to start harvesting the asparagus for the first time. And I did interplant some more strawberries in here too. In fact, there's strawberry that was munched on by, not me, probably some kind of insect eating our strawberries. So I have a mixture of asparagus and strawberries in this bed. Right behind me here, it's another perennial. This is a Jerusalem artichoke bed. There's tubers down in the soil, and they actually produce these, they look like sunflowers, and they're actually in the sunflower family. They put off really beautiful yellow flowers like a sunflower, but you can actually harvest the roots and you can cook them like a potato, which I haven't actually done yet, but this whole bed, you can see how full this is. These are full of those Jerusalem artichoke tubers, so in a survival situation, we could just harvest up this bed and eat up all the Jerusalem artichoke tubers down in the soil, which is really cool. And this is good for attracting pollinators too, once these flowers start blooming. One last perennial crop I want to mention here. This is a walking onion, and what these do, this is a perennial onion. You plant a bulb, and this one's a good example. They form a little seed head, and they get so heavy and they fall to the ground, and this is going to end up rooting in the soil and kind of walking to the soil, and then that gets rooted and it's going to form more of a green stalk, and then the other stalk's going to get heavy and fall down, and it just walks. These are eventually going to take up the whole garden space here. I had more, some of them got eaten by pests, so right now I only have 1, 2, 3 walking onion in here, but you see how they kind of lay on the soil, and there are a lot of weeds in here. I gotta get out of here. But the idea is you plant these perennial crops once and they'll feed you forever, and that makes your gardening a whole lot easier, especially as a new gardener. I didn't even know these crops existed as a new gardener. Now, those are just a few examples of perennials, but obviously anything that you enjoy eating, you should probably grow more of as your perennial in your first garden. Now, getting back to the original premise of the video is how would I go about creating my very first garden beds? Knowing what I know today, if I can go back in time, I'll tell you right now. Here is what I would recommend. 2 raised beds, 1, 2, with about 2 feet between them. This is obviously less than 2 feet, but you probably want to make them a little bit further apart so it's more comfortable to get in between them. And I would connect them with a trellis. 2 single raised beds connected by 1 arched cattle panel trellis. This right here would be the perfect starting point for any beginning gardener. I say that because it'd be very hard to be overwhelmed by just 2 raised beds. And when you just start out with the cattle panel trellis, you can grow certain crops better up along the trellis. Crops like cucumbers, tomatoes, you could even do some squash or even try some watermelons, things like that. That's going to make you a lot more successful as a beginner grower. The trellis is going to help you. Having just 2 beds to manage is going to help you. And interplanting some perennials in those beds is going to help you. So you really only have to manage just the whatever crops that you plant along your trellis. So you're really only going to have to manage your tomatoes or cucumbers, you know, things like that to grow up your trellis. And let's just say we planted strawberries along, like 2 rows of strawberries along one along the outside of the bed and 1 in the center of the bed. We could have 2 rows of strawberries. You plant them about 12 inches apart in each row. Do the same here, strawberries, strawberries, and then along the trellis line, we could do a row of tomatoes. And along this trellis line, we could do a row of cucumbers, or you could intermingle some squash and pumpkin or watermelon, anything that would enjoy growing up a trellis. So you really don't have to do too much other than the initial setup of the 2 raised beds, plant a couple perennials in there, and then plant some vining crops to grow on the trellis. It's going to be a really beautiful space too. Now, these raised beds I've made out of cedar fence boards. You can see they're kind of thin, but not like too thin. They have a solid thickness to them, but they're not like a thick kind of 2x4, but it is cedar. So this is the most affordable way I've found to make raised beds with cedar, is to get these cedar fence boards. So that's why I like to get these. They're less than $4 for a 6-foot board. You could really build a single raised bed with these 6-foot boards for, what is it, around $12. You need 3 boards to make 1 raised bed. So about $12 to make a cedar raised bed. So 2 of these, you're looking at about $25 to make 2 cedar raised beds. It doesn't get any easier and simpler than that. Now just take a look quick at how I set up this trellis here. I'm on the outside of the 1 bed here, and I have 2 T-posts in the ground. I would say these are, I think they were 8-foot T-posts. I think they were 8-foot T-posts, so yeah. T-post in the ground, and then I have a 4-foot wide by 16-foot long cattle panel connected to 2 more T-posts on the other side of the 2nd bed. So they're not inside the bed, they're right on the outside of the raised bed. Okay? And it's just so simple. It's just a really simple setup. This would be a great thing to do for your very first garden. I wish I had done this when I first started gardening. Now, if you plant this correctly and grow some nice vining crops up this trellis, you're gonna have a beautiful trellis full of foliage by midsummer, and it's gonna be a place that you're gonna wanna be spending a lot of time in the garden. And then you're already gonna be thinking, even before the end of that first gardening season, you're gonna be planning on how you can expand that garden. So that's why I really recommend the trellis. I really wish I would have done this when I first started. It took me a few years to figure these things out, but if I could go back in time, definitely would do the trellis and start with those 2 single raised beds. And you might be wondering what I have in these 2 raised beds right now, and it's actually wheat. I have wheat over there that's actually already starting to form some seed heads there. My idea with the wheat is, my plan is to let this become a weed barrier because I'm planting tomatoes in these beds. I've already actually planted tomatoes in these beds, but the wheat is going to improve the soil in those beds, and it's going to eliminate competition with weeds because all that weed is already there. There's no space for weeds to really grow, even though they're still trying. They're in there, but I planted our tomatoes already directly in there into the beds of wheat. I also have a few different crops this year. I have a special kind of cucumber on the one side to grow up the trellis, and on this side of the trellis I'm growing loofah gourds. They're kind of small right now. You can see them right here. There's a loofah. I planted 3 of them. They were just planted maybe a week or so ago. They'll start growing, and I can't wait to see some really awesome crops hanging down from the center of this trellis later this year. Now the trellis here, it's going to make your cucumbers and tomatoes a lot happier by training the foliage to grow up off the soil. And you can easily guide them up to the trellis by either using zip ties along the trellis to connect them to the trellis, or something I did last year was connect some twine to these tomatoes on the inside here and tying that twine up to the top of the cattle panel, so it would kind of hold up the tomatoes. Instead of having them sag onto the ground, they were standing up, and that keeps them a lot healthier and prevents them from getting disease and things like that. So this trellis is going to make your life a lot easier as a beginner gardener because it's going to help you grow healthier crops. So there you have it. I think these 2 single raised beds connected by a trellis would be the ultimate first garden for a beginner gardener and set you up for success. And I think by the end of that first season, after growing in just these 2 raised beds with the trellis connecting them, I think you're going to be wanting to expand your garden. I guarantee it. And if that is the case, I have a book coming out called The 400 Square Foot Garden that details step by step how you could turn a 20-foot by 20-foot space in your backyard, transform it from grass into a really productive urban square foot gardening area. That's what I have behind me. I have 12 raised beds all around me, surrounded by food. I'm growing food in a really small area, and a lot of people might have that space in their backyard, not know how to best utilize it. I think I've accomplished that in my 400 square foot garden. I put it all in that book. It's coming out at the end of this month, and right now you can sign up for our email newsletter and get sent the first chapter of our book for free, and you'll be notified the moment that the book goes live on Amazon. Really excited about it. Thanks guys for watching. Hope you found this video helpful, and we'll see you in the next one.